All right. So what happens for everybody that's out there is that as we're now live, the participants are coming online. And so I will say good morning to everybody, and hopefully everyone can hear me in the chat. It always takes a minute or two to for everything to come through. But good morning, Phyllis.
Good morning. How are you?
Oh, hey, thank you. Thank you, Allie, Richard. Appreciate saying good morning. Anyone else who's out there can say good morning as well, because we're always like happy to know that other people can hear us okay. So well, thank you, Carrie. We see you twice here, Phyllis, both in the presentation. We're going to give it just one more minute to get started because I know that people are still waking up. I have my coffee here. Just always an early morning when we have these webinars because we have to get everything done before we get here and get settled. So, oh, hi, Lindsay. How are you? So Lindsay Toms is the other owner of the Study Pro, and she's in the background making sure everything's working okay. She's always doing probably the most important stuff. But I will go ahead and introduce myself. Whoops, I'm going to go ahead and say a couple things. But for those who will ask, this webinar is being recorded, and the way that we're going to do this is that we're going to go ahead and have the presentation. I'll say a couple words, but we'll have the presentation, and then we're going to leave about 10 minutes or so for questions. So we'll be able to answer, Phyllis will be able to answer questions at that time. But I am Debbie Rosen, and I'm from the Study Pro. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Study Pro, we are an executive function and study skill center. And so what does that mean? It means that we help students with the process of school. So a lot of our students actually, it's not that they're challenged with what's happening in the math and science and history. It's just sometimes knowing that those assignments exist, being able to push through and to manage all of that work. We know that executive functions are developmental. And so, of course, for those people that are in parents of middle schoolers, those executive functions are really just coming online, and they develop through the 20s and even early 30s. I have a 24-year-old, and I'm starting to see some of it, and I'm really hoping that that's true. It goes all the way to, well, Phyllis and I do really have older and younger kids that are the same age. So we do see that there is some hope for those of you who just have middle schoolers. And so there's a few things that we do. We do executive function coaching. We also have a homework center, which is what I'm sitting in right now, to help reduce the barriers for students to get their homework done. Study skills courses, time management, organization, how to break work down, how to study for tests. And then we also do writing coaching. We have writing courses in the summer. And we have these webinars that are every month. These are just some examples of some webinars that we have upcoming. Phyllis, I'm sure she knows all of these amazing women here who have all themselves written books and have topics across the educational and mental health arenas. And so if you are on this webinar, you will be getting invitations for all these upcoming webinars. We're going to send the one out for November 9th, right this week or early next week, right as we finish this one. The other thing that we do is we do workshops. We do writing workshops, and this one is for 4th and 5th graders. Oh, it actually doesn't say that on here, but this one in the small little print, it says 4th and 5th graders, but I will leave you this up for a second. So if you're interested, you can take a picture of the QR code. You can also find it on our website under workshops, but we have a few more spots for this Saturday, actually, for 4th and 5th graders, if you are local, because this is in person. And we'll be sending out invitations for upcoming middle and high school writing workshops. These are all free. And that's part of what we do, to support the community. And Lindsay actually just provided the link. Thank you, Lindsay. I told you she does all the important work. So with that, we are super excited to have you, Phyllis. I have the book here, and I just love it. And what I love especially about it is just being able to say, oh my gosh, that's the superpower I really need to help my child work on, and really be able to just dive in deep to that. but I wanted to share a little bit about Phyllis. This is, I think, your second or third time speaking at the Study Pro. The first time on a webinar, because we used to do things in person, if you remember, of course, when everyone did. But in addition to being an author of 2 books, Middle School Matters and Middle School Superpowers, she's also a licensed clinical professional counselor. She works at the Chrysalis Group, and then a certified professional school counselor, and just recently moved to the Landon School, which is in Maryland, in Bethesda, Maryland. I know that I devour everything that you write. Of course, you know that I follow you on social media because I'm always commenting, and we're very excited to have you here today because you have just incredible, incredible insights. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my sharing so that you can share your slides, and that way you can go ahead and control them. But just a repeat, if some of you are just joining us, I'm Debbie Rosen from the Study Pro. We're welcoming Phyllis, and this will be recorded. We will send out the link afterwards, and we'll take questions in the last 10 minutes. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Phyllis, and we're super excited to hear everything you have to share.
Thanks, and thanks for the nice introduction, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today. I am actually really excited to talk about this book because to me, this is the more personal of the 2 books. It is written with all of the emotion and angst and excitement and discovery that came along with working with kids over the last several years, which, as we all know, has been a very tumultuous time. That's why the subhead is Raising Resilient Tweens in Turbulent Times. And my hope is that all of the strategies that I have been using with these extreme tweens, that's what I've been calling them, will also be effective with kids in any other time, because if those strategies work at the margins, I'm imagining that they will work with kids who are going through anything that happens in the future. It's hard to imagine things getting more complicated than they are right now. And in the book, there are 12 superpowers. I'm going to jump around for a second. I just want to start here. And the superpowers relate to the developmental phase. So I'm going to go into each one of these in a little bit, but when we think about this age group, we think about kids who are insecure. We think about kids who are vulnerable, who are still acquiring all of the skills they need to self-advocate for themselves, to be able to stay organized. It's very easy for them to get overwhelmed. And because these skills align with the phase, when we teach them specific strategies within each of these subgroups, we are preparing them not only for middle school, for life well beyond middle school, and we're also simultaneously targeting the anxiety and some of the sadness and loneliness that can set in these years. It can be a melancholy time when kids make that transition from young childhood to the middle school years. I'm going to go back for a second and share some of what I have been hearing. And it looks like, okay, there we go. I need my glasses. I don't think I needed my glasses the last 2 times I presented. This is after all the time on screens post-pandemic and during the pandemic. So the first one here is something I hear a lot from boys in this age group. Why does everything have to be a competition? And I'm hearing this more now, I think, because when you're even more insecure, remember these are the extreme tweens, you are even more acutely aware of how you stack up to everyone else. And kids can really lock horns over really dumb things. Things like who's better at video games, or who was able to go first, or who's getting called on most. That's one of the challenges I'm seeing. Another relates to the ability to turn an acquaintance or a school friend into a real friend, even confusion over what the difference is between an acquaintance and a real friend. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Next one here is I'm worried about, and you can fill in the blank. I think this is the first time in my professional life that I've seen so many kids who are presenting problems related to school safety drills in particular. That might even be their primary complaint. And it's not hard to imagine why kids are anxious about their safety, their security, but of course that will get in the way of their ability to focus and learn at school. Embarrass myself if I try and again fill in the blank. So this might be something related to trying out for a team, especially if they don't want to embarrass themselves in front of a friend who might make a team, or if they're envious of a friend who might make the team and they don't. It might relate to raising their hand in class, giving a presentation. So one of the superpowers is super daring. I'll be going into some strategies for helping kids continue to take risks when they are that insecure. It's easier to be by myself than go out during break. And it doesn't have to be break. It could be lunch. There are kids that I'm seeing that are hiding in staff bathrooms rather than join kids at break. And it's not because they don't want to be around other kids. It's because they don't know how to be around other kids. And it creates a lot of anxiety. So I'll talk about social skills as well. And then there is a lot of emotional discomfort. Your kids might come home and say someone was mean or somebody was bullying them. But most of the time, what I'm seeing is something related to emotional discomfort. And this is the classic example that they suddenly have to share their best friend with someone else who they don't like very much. And they unfortunately don't get to dictate who their friends hang out with, but that is something that can be hard for them to navigate. And then the last one here is I can't get started, or I can't stop before I finish. And that is twin sides of the same coin, different sides of the same coin. One relates to either being too overwhelmed or too flooded with ideas or too anxious to get started. And the other is about perfectionism and the inability to set your work aside and have a balanced life. Another one of the superpowers is super balance. So those are just some of the common complaints that I'm hearing and seeing. And so I'm going to go through each of the 12 and not in depth. And some of them I'll talk about more than others because I think they are more foundational. First one here is super flexibility, and that's the power to manage change and uncertainty. And again, thinking about the developmental phase, we're talking about kids who are in the middle of change, often from one physical building to another. Their bodies and brains are changing faster than any other time other than birth to age 2. Their friendships are highly unstable and often inauthentic and very fragile. I often will share the statistics on friendship with kids, including the fact that only a third of friendships last from fall to spring of the first year of middle school. 12% of sixth graders have nobody name them as a friend. If you ask kids to name their best friend, only half of them name them back. And if you follow kids from 7th grade to 12th grade, only 1% of those friendships are still stable. And while that sounds dreadful to adults and kind of reinforces some of our worst stereotypes about middle school, it's actually reassuring to kids because it reinforces this idea that it's not personal, that this is just when kids are doing the work of figuring out how to be a friend, how to pick a friend, and that's going to come along with a lot of instability. So they have to be able to roll with that kind of change. There's a lot of things we can do to support them. And I didn't even mention puberty, but obviously that creates a lot of anxiety as well. I quote a kid in my book who came to me at the beginning of a health and wellness class. I teach sex ed, and said, can we just skip it? And I'm used to kids not being too enthusiastic about health class. So I asked them if they meant health class, and they said, no, puberty. They wanted to skip puberty altogether. And who could blame them? It really is a lot. And you've got kids going through puberty at very different times, which means that kids are at varying levels of sophistication. And that is hard, whether you're the first or the last. Again, helping them manage those milestones, those changes is something that we can do. We can coach them. One way to do that is to stay really connected to the school community. You follow them on social media so that you have some talking points, so that you can bring up topics that are not too personal, but that give them an opening. You can take them in the summer before they are starting middle school. If they haven't started, same is true for high school. You can go visit a high school setting. So many 9th and 10th graders are presenting right now like middle schoolers and struggling with all of the same exact skill sets that other kids that are younger than them are struggling with, in part because of the prolonged isolation and the lack of the ability to practice those skills. You can going to visit the school itself, walking around, just helping them get familiar with it so it's less of an unknown. You can help them come up with a plan in advance for things that are causing them anxiety. And you can do that at any time during the school year, anytime that they're nervous about something, whether it's walking into a cafeteria or trying out for a team. You can help them walk through their feelings in advance so that it's easier for them to be brave in the moment. You can help them think about what resources they might need to manage it. I share a story about a girl who was too afraid to go into the lunchroom. And a friend of mine who's a social worker asked that girl, "What is it that you're most afraid of?" And she said, "I'm afraid that I'll have no one to sit with. I'll go to a table and I'll get turned away." And my friend said, "That's not the worst thing that could happen. The worst thing that could happen is that you sit down and everyone gets up and walks away." And of course, she was joking, but trying to highlight that then their worst case scenario is unlikely to come to fruition. But after they had that conversation and after she made the kid laugh and lighten the mood a little bit, they were able to talk about what she could do in that moment. For instance, she could bring a book in or have something that she could look at so she wasn't just sitting there looking around feeling awkward. And they were able to talk about how odds were that once people started eating, it would feel less awkward once she had something to do. And you want to normalize that this is hard for everybody. There's a researcher at the University of Wisconsin named Jeffrey Borman, and he did a study with new middle schoolers where he read them social stories that were purportedly written by former sixth graders, now seventh or eighth graders. And in those social stories, they talked about how when they first got to middle school, they felt like all they were was a number, that teachers didn't care about them unless they got good grades, that they wouldn't be successful there, but that over time they realized that the adults really cared about them. They started to settle in, they started to feel more comfortable. And what they found is that not only did kids do better emotionally when they had that, when they were primed to expect that discomfort and also reassured that it wouldn't last forever, they did better academically. They even had better graduation rates from high school years down the road. So there's a lot of power in normalizing that change is hard. Share stories from your own life. The next one, and this probably is the most important of the 12, is super belonging. And this is the power to find your place and make strong connections. And I'll share some of my favorite strategies for different scenarios that your kids might find themselves in. And this is not only applicable to middle school, but this is a time when it is the hardest for kids to imagine that things could get better, in part because often it's the first time some of these setbacks are happening to them and they don't have a lot of life experience or perspective. So to even imagine other possibilities other than someone hates them or wants to exclude them is really hard. So I call it the maybe game. And the way I do this is I start by saying to a kid, I want you to imagine some other more benign reasons why they excluded you or said something mean. Could be even a teacher, why a teacher didn't call on you or deducted a point on a quiz that you thought was unfair, other than that worst case scenario. And you have to tell them they don't have to believe the alternative explanation, because if they think they have to believe it, they'll get stuck. And we're not trying to talk them out of their feeling. We're trying to help them develop cognitive flexibility, which is a really protective skill to have in life, not just middle school. So I'll give you an example. I had a student who was upset and unable to focus at school, which often happens if kids are worrying about social issues, because 3 days earlier, and this was still weighing on him, his friends had gotten together on a Friday night without him. And it was his immediate friend group, the 4 or 5 kids he hangs out with all the time. And his brain was working overtime, trying to figure out why they would have done that. He started out thinking they just didn't want him there. But by the time he saw me, he had worked himself up to the point where he had convinced himself that not only did they not want him there, but they didn't want him there so they could trash talk him, which as adults, we can imagine is a little far-fetched, but that was where his head was. And then he couldn't focus. So when I asked him to come up with other explanations and told him he didn't have to believe them, took him a little while, but he eventually said, maybe what happened is they were all at baseball practice because they're all on the team together and I'm not on that team. And it just organically bled into them hanging out. And I was an afterthought maybe, or they didn't think about me at all, but it wasn't personal. And then he looked up, and I got lucky in this case because he said, I think that's actually what happened. But if we don't walk them through that process of thinking more expansively, they can really get stuck, and we want them to have a gentler experience socially. Second one here has to do with that emotional discomfort I talked about earlier. could show up in lots of different ways. It could be that scenario where they have to share a friend. It could be that they weren't invited to a party they wanted to go to. And we know, again, as adults, we know that we're not going to be invited to everything, but your feelings are your feelings, especially when you're 12 or 13. And what we want to do is help them delineate between different behaviors so that they can manage it on their own to the extent that they can. It's really important for them to develop the skill to resolve conflict. So what you're listening for is whether it's meanness, bullying, or emotional discomfort. Meanness is a one-off, unkind comment. Meanness is two people on equal footing who are in an argument. Bullying is the 3 Ps. There's an intent to wound. There's a pattern. It's not a one-off comment. And there's a power imbalance, which can show up in lots of different ways. It might be that one person has a developmental delay. It might be that one person is older. It could be a group of kids against one. It could be somebody with a lot of social capital picking on someone who doesn't have very much social capital. If it's meanness, you want to be coaching them, helping them problem solve, but you want to be letting them get in there and do it themselves. If you start texting other parents, you're probably just going to make it worse for them. If it's bullying, true bullying, odds are they will need you to get involved. And then you can talk to them about how they want you to get involved and what that might look like. Emotional discomfort is what you want to be explaining to kids is hard, but it happens. Skipping ahead to the 4th bullet there, that friend, stranger, acquaintance one. Often when there's emotional discomfort about not getting invited to something, it's because someone who is not actually a friend didn't invite them to something. That person is an acquaintance. It's a school friend. And it's hard for kids to understand the difference between those two. But it's really good information for them and for you, because if they had wanted to be invited and it's just somebody that they're hanging out with at school, that probably suggests that they'd like to get to know that person better. And then you can talk to them about what they might need to do to take that acquaintanceship to that next level and turn them into a friend. Obviously, a stranger is somebody they have no relationship whatsoever. They're less likely to be uncomfortable that somebody didn't invite them in that situation. My own students tease me for how strongly I feel about disliking the best friend label. It's a huge deal, especially for younger middle schoolers, 5th graders, 6th graders, who just overfreight the importance of having a best friend. And there are so many reasons I like to discourage that whole best friendship idea. The first being that it's lose-lose. Often they don't have a social safety net if something goes wrong. Meanwhile, everyone around them feels like a third wheel. But the bigger reason I don't love it is because the kids who do the best in high school, socially, emotionally, are the ones who are floaters, who have friends in lots of different groups. And the only way you can have friends in lots of different groups is if you really hone your social skills and can interact with a broad range of people. And if you're only practicing your social skills with one person, then you are not developing that skill set. So one way you can support that development is by talking to your kids about your friendships and underscoring that no one single friend can meet all of your needs. So maybe you have one friend that you like to go jogging with, another friend you like to reminisce about your old nostalgic memories with because you grew up with them, maybe another friend who you know you can count on in a crisis, another one who's great at lightening the mood, but really helping them understand why it's important to branch out. If they're stuck and they're having an argument and they just cannot move on with that competition angle that I was mentioning in the social scenarios, it might be 2 kids who won't let it go, that they each think the other person is worse at Fortnite or something than they are. These very silly arguments are often where kids get stuck. That's when I tell them to give the friendship a vote. So I ask them each what they need, and then I'll ask them if you could give the friendship itself a vote, what would the friendship say it needs? And it's a way for them to let down their defenses a little bit. And in the situation with the 2 kids fighting over Fortnite, that's when they were able to say, you know what, the friendship would probably say this is stupid and we should let it go. And these were 2 very, very close friends. And I think they were frankly relieved to have an out, to have an ability to just move forward. And then the last one here relates to anything that goes on in the super belonging department. And this is about teaching concrete social skills, which I think we sometimes don't do with middle schoolers. We think they're too old, but so many kids come and tell me that they don't know how to join a conversation, or I might notice that they are sort of lingering near people and they're not even saying a word. And somehow they think they're part of the conversation and don't understand that they have to say at least 2 or 3 words to be part of that conversation. So talking to them about things like if somebody looks away, maybe that means they're bored, or if you're finding that kids are not interested in what you're sharing, maybe it's because you're only talking about one topic ad nauseum and it has nothing to do with what the other kids in the group are talking about. What you're looking for is not to shame them or to embarrass them. If you notice something about how they're interacting with their friends that's sort of off, tell them in a moment when they're alone. Tell them in a non-judgmental way. Use examples from your own life. Use phrases like, I noticed, I wondered, things that will not make them feel criticized, but that will allow them to work on those skills. And usually kids are actually quite grateful to have those strategies. All right, the next one here is Supersight, and this is the power to anticipate problems and make a plan, which in middle school is really hard because your brain is very much under construction. So it can take longer for signals to go from the back of your brain, the sort of primitive fight, flight, or fight part of your brain, to your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical thinking, rational, self-compassionate, empathetic part of the brain, the part that we want them using when they're making decisions, especially ones related to safety. They also are hindered by a lot of emotional interference. So much can get in the way. Everything from jealousy, insecurity, wanting to fit in, wanting to make kids laugh. And all of those can lead to problems. So especially online, I probably will always have a job as long as there's social media because of everything that goes down in the 6th grade group text chat. So monitor that stuff. You don't want to read all of it because you would be online all of the time, but monitor it enough to have a sense of what's going on. I tell some crazy stories in the book about things that I have seen, and I'm always grateful when parents are monitoring. One way to help them make good decisions is to do some preemptive problem solving. So I like to I like it when parents, and I've even done this as a teacher with students and as a counselor, sit down next to them, have them go through their feed. It could be text, it could be Snapchat, Instagram, whatever they're using, and ask them to find the post or text that sticks out as aberrant or different than the others, that makes them feel a little bit uncomfortable in hindsight. Meanwhile, you do the same and ask them which one they chose. And often it's one where they might have over disclosed something and they felt exposed. It could be they shared gossip they shouldn't have shared. It might be they said something kind of mean that they regret. It could be that they lied and then they didn't know how to get out of the lie. All kinds of things can go wrong. Maybe they sent something they shouldn't have sent. And then ask them, what were the conditions at the time you posted it? More often than not, it's late at night in their bedroom. It's why I don't believe in technology in the bedroom at all. No kids are making good decisions late at night online. It might be that they had a setback at school that day and they were more vulnerable, or they were angry with somebody, or they were trying to impress a peer group that they wanted to be a part of. Once they figured out what was going on, then they have a better understanding of their vulnerabilities. So they can take a little bit longer to pause if they're in that same situation the next time. The next one here is called the values card sort. And you can find a list of values in lots of different places. Brene Brown, Darren Greatley has one. And again, print out 2 sets, one for them, one for you. Go through the values, ask them to choose the 10 that best reflect the kind of person they want to be, the kind of people they want to surround themselves with, the traits that are most important to them. Could be generosity, kindness, doesn't really matter which ones they choose. This is about building that self-awareness. You do the same. Have a conversation with them about why you chose yours. They can share why they chose theirs. I love this activity because you're not lecturing them or telling them what's important, but what they should value, but you are telling them what's important to you, and they do very much care what you think. And then explain to them that when they are in a tricky situation and they want to check the choice that they're making, or they want to do a gut check, because they think something might be getting in the way of making the right decision, but they're not sure, them which of the choices they're considering most closely aligns with the 10 values that they chose. And I like that because it's much more stable than all of the emotional stuff that can get in their way of making good decisions. And when I do this with kids, more often than not, they tell me later that they were happier when they went with that values-based decision. You can also talk to them about the kinds of experiences and encounters they might have in middle school that might lead them to make decisions they'll regret, whether it's cheating or vaping in the bathroom or lying to you, spreading gossip, and explain to them, and this is what inoculation theory is. First, you explain why they might be tempted to do whatever that behavior is. With gossip, maybe it's fun to have the best story at the lunch table. It feels good to have all eyes on you. It feels powerful in that moment. And then the second part is to give them a compelling counter argument. You know, it feels even better. What feels even better is to be known as a vault, as someone who everyone can trust completely. And what's cool about inoculation theory is that you don't have to do that for every last scenario that they will have to deal with. But if you do it across enough scenarios, they learn to think that way and they can generalize and they can apply it. Building in time, as I mentioned, it takes a little bit of time for the signals to get to the front of their brain. I will give kids very practical strategies. Just sit on your hands and sing the alphabet before you post. Give yourself time to ask a few questions. Could this hurt me? Could this hurt someone else? Do I think I will regret it later? That's where temporal distancing comes in. This is the idea that they can ask themselves, how will I feel about this in 5 hours, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years? And that strategy can be used to help them make good decisions. It also can be used to help them deal with disappointment or when something doesn't go the way that they want it to go. All right, super vulnerability. I'm just going to briefly share one strategy here. It's so important that kids know when and how to ask for help. My favorite, very simple question for parents is to ask your child, which adult would you go to if you were in a crisis? And specify that it doesn't have to be you. And the reason you want to ask that question is threefold. One, you want them to be thinking about this when they're not in crisis and they're thinking clearly. Two, you want them to be going to an adult and not a similarly impaired 7th grader, especially for a big problem, whether it's themselves or a friend. And the third reason is that it's not intuitive for them to ask for help. So we want to be normalizing help-seeking behavior. Okay, moving on to super bounce. Every single middle schooler is going to make a lot of mistakes. We want them to know that we expect that, and we want to help them recover and move forward and not get stuck. It's such a key part of resilience. So these are some of my favorite phrases that help you get that runway into helping them with the problem solving. And first one is, I'm guessing you did that because. I'm guessing you cheated because you didn't want to admit you didn't know what you were doing. Or I'm guessing you cheated because you didn't want us to be disappointed if you got a low grade. You're not saying it's okay. You're just validating that you understand why they might have done that and opening that conversation, helping them let down their defenses. The great thing about that particular phrase is that if they're wrong, they'll tell you why you're wrong, and that's good information too. Do you think you were your best self? This is about taking the pressure off the relationship you have with your child so that instead of them fighting with you or trying to prove to you why what they did was okay, or maybe even saying they didn't do it at all, what you want is for them to have to wrestle with the decision, for them to think about whether or not this is how they want to show up in the world. It's really related to that values card sort I talked about. I bet it felt awful when. This is just showing some empathy. And this is one of my favorite phrases when kids lose control. You might see this at home if they just go off on a sibling. No kid likes to lose control, and starting with empathy and understanding that their hormones are all over the place and it's not always easy to self-regulate. And sometimes it doesn't go well, and that's okay. But once you have that buy-in, you can then say, can I help you? Can we think about what we might be able to do so that doesn't happen again, since that felt so bad? Because I've never had a kid tell me that it didn't feel bad to lose control. I also would be embarrassed if I thought a teacher embarrassed me in front of my classmates. or I'd also be upset if I felt like a friend had rejected me. So you're not starting in by saying something like, no, they didn't mean that, or just sort of denying their feelings. You want to first help them feel understood. Then you can start reasoning with them a little bit. I wonder, or I've noticed, these are some of my favorite phrases if you don't like their friend group, or if you see that they're hanging out with kids who are unkind to them. Rather than saying, I don't want you hanging out with that person, in which case, again, they're just going to twist themselves into a pretzel to prove you wrong or sneak around and hang out with them. You might say something like, I've noticed you're not yourself with that particular friend, or it seems like you're much more comfortable when you're with this other friend. I wonder what that's about. Always asking for an invitation before you just jump in and try to fix things. Sometimes they just want to unload whatever it is so that you can carry it around and they can go back to school not worrying about it anymore. If they are just digging in their heels and they will not admit that they did anything wrong, you can say, I hear you. It does sound like it's 98% that other person's fault, and I can understand why you feel that way. If you had to own your 2%, what would that 2% be? And what you're looking for is a way for them to zoom in on what it is that got in their way, or what it is that they need to work on. And then this last one is also about friendship and peer pressure. Peer pressure isn't usually coercive. It's typically behavior contagion. So kids are who they hang out with, particularly with boys. Boys are more likely than girls to make either good or bad choices, depending on what same age, same sex kids in their friend group are doing. So first of all, raising their awareness about that so that they can make some good decisions preemptively about who they're spending time with them, but then helping them develop that critical thinking skill about analyzing how they're showing up differently with different kids. All right, super agency. I'll just touch on this one quickly. This is about the developmental phase too, because kids so badly need to feel like they can make a difference in the world, that they can change other circumstances, and that the adults see them as competent and capable of contributing to the community. So really looking for ways for them to proactively get in there and improve their circumstances. If they don't do well on a test, could simply be going in and talking to the teacher the next day, rather than feeling like a passive victim of fate, that they're just going to, be terrible at that particular subject forever. That's the difference between being reactive or passive. Reactive, they just cry and feel bad about it. Passive is they do nothing. And then look for ways to help them feel like they matter, kind of matter as a verb. That might be that they are contributing to the household in some way, or helping a younger sibling with homework, walking the dog, really pointing out that they're making a contribution at home when they are, and also looking at things that might matter to them in the community or their school or the world, and looking for volunteer opportunities. If they're reluctant, they might be more willing to do it with a friend. But those are both ways to really protect their well-being. Okay, force field, super force field. This is about the power to set healthy boundaries. And this is more applicable to girls typically. They have been told their whole lives to be kind and generous, and sometimes they end up getting pulverized because they forget to take care of themselves, or they get in over their heads. So maybe they're engaging in a text exchange with a friend who's upset about something, and it's been going on forever and it's wearing them down. Or maybe somebody is talking to them about a problem that's way beyond their level of expertise, and they're really stressed about it, but that friend is making them promise not to tell an adult. We want to preemptively be telling them that it's really important for them not only to preserve their well-being, but also to be kind. Sometimes you need to take a step back and say to a friend, that sounds really big. That's something that I don't think I can handle, but are you talking to an adult about this? Do you want me to help you talk to an adult about this? I don't think that's something I can keep a secret. And they can also have policies that they adhere to, like I never respond to texts after a certain time. Sometimes just going in with a policy or a rule that they set for themselves is easier than each time going through that problem-solving process again. Okay, super security is the power to take pride in your identity and step into someone else's shoes. And when I talk about identity in the book, I really put anything that a middle schooler thinks about as setting them apart as being different than others under that same umbrella. So it could be one of the biggies that we think about, like race or religion or sexuality, or it could be something related to the fact that they have a learning challenge, or that they are not athletic and they feel like all their friends are athletic, or it could be that their parents don't let them go on sleepovers for cultural reasons, anything that makes them feel different. And we want them to be taking pride in whatever it is that defines them or that they feel like it defines them. And some of my favorite strategies to bolster their confidence: when they tell you that they're feeling bad about a perceived weakness, ask them to come up with 2 strengths that come with that weakness. I like to use examples from other industries. You might share that the founder of IKEA had dyslexia, which obviously made school harder, but it also helped him think more creatively. He's the one who came up with visual instructions because of that particular issue. Or it might be that they're struggling with ADHD, but that's something that allows them to take more risks in the classroom. That impulsivity makes them braver or makes other kids more likely to take risks. One here relates, again, mostly to girls, but boys also are impacted in terms of their self-esteem as much as girls if they're spending a lot of time on there and using it in ways that expose them to images that give them this idea that there's some ideal, perfect, right way to be a man. And we all know that girls are impacted if they're scrolling through Instagram passively, looking at other people's portrayals of their perfect lives, or if they're feeling left out or less than. So really helping them think about how they feel when they log on and off different platforms and if it's working for them. Again, having them come up with that themselves rather than you telling them what to do is going to, in the long run, be more effective. And the last one here is positive Post-its. So it takes 5 positives to make up for 1 negative. So this is about having them write down on different Post-it notes 5 things that they like about themselves, or if they're struggling, you can contribute to that list as well. Things you like about them, things their friends might like about them. And anytime they find themselves talking in a self-critical way in their own head, ask them or urge them to read at least 5 of those positive Post-it notes. Again, they don't have to believe it in the moment, but we're teaching them to challenge that negativity, that inner negativity, and think more flexibly. Right. I'm cognizant of time. I never in my life have gone through all of my slides, but I'll try to get through these real quick. The first one here is about coping out loud. You can even write down strategies that you as a family are using and stick them in a jar, and kids can try their own or yours. Encourage them to take breaks from worrying. I like to write down my worries on a Post-it note or an index card and open my freezer and say, I'm putting my worry on ice, just as a metaphor to say we're going to be exhausted if we don't let things go temporarily. We're not saying they don't exist. We're giving ourselves permission to take a step back. They can activate their parasympathetic nervous system to calm their body, which in turn can calm their thoughts. Some of my favorite ways to do that are to give themselves a tight self-hug, tense and release their shoulders. They can splash cold water on their face. Lots of different ways. You can look them up online as well for a whole long list of them. But the ones I just mentioned are really easy for them to use in the school setting too, when they might find themselves feeling overwhelmed. Help them find what they can control and what they care about. That sweet spot is that where they overlap. So yes, they could pick a fight with a friend who looked at them funny and make an issue of it. That's in their control. But do they want to? Is that how they want to use their energy? Their stamina is down. They might be better off waiting a few hours and seeing if they just have an organic interaction that's normal, and then maybe they can let it go. Cognitive offloading is just a way to clear out room in their head for all the emotional stuff. So writing down all the things they need to do on a piece of paper so they don't have to hold it. And that not only helps them remember things better that they have to do that are responsibilities, but also is a way to give them more emotional space and room to deal with all the social challenges they're facing. And then the last one here is help them come up with the feeling. You might say, I've noticed you look sad. Is that right? So that you can come up with the right solution to a problem. Super balance is often related to social media, but it really is about prioritizing in general. We don't want kids spending all of their time on homework to the detriment of their social lives, and they end up feeling lonely. We also don't want them spending all of their time socializing and getting overwhelmed in school or really falling behind. So this is from Laurie Santos. She calls it the 3 W's, but one other way for them to be mindful of their technology use is to have them ask themselves, what for, why now, what else? Meaning, what am I using it for? Why am I using it now? And what else could I be doing instead? The second is to just make a list with them of all the things you collectively think goes into a balanced day, and encourage them to start with the things that are offline before they go online. And the last one here is for kids who are unmotivated or procrastinating, which can end up creating great imbalance later when they're really far behind. Just talking about the tasks that they have to get done in a different way. You might ask a question like, what's one positive or at least neutral thing about getting it done? You might say, I don't feel like paying taxes, but the good thing is once I do it, I don't have to do it for another year. It's done. Super daring, power to go out on a limb and take smart risks. Research shows that just using the phrase rough draft thinking can loosen their thinking and help them get started. Never say do your best to a perfectionist because it's impossible. There's no such thing. We want them to try the things that are hard for them, but we want them to move at a comfortable pace. So, for instance, I had a student who didn't want to go to Spanish class because she was behind and she was afraid she'd get called on. And perfect often is the enemy of the good. And skipping altogether, which is what she was doing, was not working for anybody. So we came up with a plan where first she went to class, but we could promise her that the teacher wouldn't call on her. Then the teacher was going to call on her after a couple of weeks, but the teacher would feed her the question in advance so she could feel prepared. And then ultimately we were moving toward getting her to participate just like every other student. So we want them to be continuously moving that dial. We want them to experiment too. We want them to try new things. And sometimes our own anxiety can get in the way of allowing our kids to do that. So just a reminder that anything that falls in the category of school or extracurriculars tends to be a safe risk. If safety is involved for real physical safety, that's when you want to be getting involved. But otherwise, it's really important to let them try things and have it not go well sometimes, regroup and figure out where their strengths and their interests intersect. And then the last one here is to help them set brave goals. If there's something that they want to do, talk to them about why it's something that they want to do and really help them understand that two things can be true at once. You can be scared to do something and you can have another emotion that's motivating you that can trump that one that's getting in your way. So maybe they're afraid to speak up in class and say the wrong thing. It's a brave goal because it really bothers them that the teacher doesn't know that they're smart and have good ideas, and they have a lot of things they want to contribute to that conversation. All right, this is the last one, and then we can move to questions. Super optimism and the power to find hope and humor in the hard stuff. I think the 24/7 news cycle, the general challenges kids face in the course of middle school, everything that's happening in terms of climate crisis, world war, wars throughout the world can really weigh heavily on kids, not to mention things like the rise in school shootings and all the other stuff that happens. But we don't want them to feel hopeless. We don't want them to feel like they're powerless. We want them to be able to keep putting one foot in front of the other. We want them to imagine that things can get better. So when we know they're trying something that may not go well, you can in advance have them talk about options B and C and something good about options B and C. You can help them walk through the best case, worst case, and most likely scenario. When you do that, often it's easier for them to imagine that the most likely scenario is the most likely. Yes, no one might want to sit with you at lunch, but what's more likely is that you're going to walk in, you're going to feel uncomfortable. For a few minutes, it's going to be awkward for you. And then you'll start eating and you'll settle in and it will get better. If they're relentlessly negative, ask them to try adding on the sentence stem, another possibility is, or other possibilities are. Have them draw on things that went well in the past or things that tried in the past that worked with when that happened in the past, I did X. And don't start by going to that worst case scenario. I call it interviewing for pain or mining for misery, because that's where they'll get stuck. It's better to be neutral or talk about something that has no bearing on their emotions rather than starting with, was so-and-so mean to you again today? Or are you worried you failed that particular test again? You want them to be thinking positively. And the last one here, and this is more existential, I remind kids we have no way of knowing if getting what we want is a good thing or not. And I think that's a really important point to make, that yes, it could be a bad thing, or it could end up opening up another door. Maybe you don't make the team, and so you have to try another activity instead, or do a rec league, and find that you are introduced to your best friend there, or you discover that you have a skill you had no idea you had because you try something else entirely. And put it all together, all of those skills. And that, to me, and this is what I've learned from the last few years, is really the recipe for a resilient middle schooler. So with that, turn it back to you.
Wow. How do you keep all that in your head? There's so many incredible strategies. I've run out of room on my page, and there's so much that I want to share. So I know we already have a couple questions. I was wondering if someone was wondering if you could repeat the statistics about friendship. I know you shared those in the past about the number of friendships that you retain through middle school and into high school.
Yeah, so the statistics that I shared were that only a third of friendships last from the fall to spring of the first year of middle school. Only a full 12% of kids have nobody name them as a friend in sixth grade. If you ask kids to name their best friend in middle school, only half of the people they name will actually name them back. And only 1% of friendships last from seventh grade to 12th grade.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know the first time I heard that you shared that, I was like, wow, that really is encouraging in a way, because, there's so much volatility during those years.
Yeah.
And oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I tell kids social status isn't fixed and people change. And I think that's an important part of optimism too. You may feel like you don't like your social standing, and power dynamics can change overnight, especially in middle school.
Yep. And as you said, a lot of this is still happening in ninth and 10th grade. I don't think there's anything I heard that really didn't relate to, because you and I both have 15-year-olds, right?
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
So there was a question about Sona's son switched schools and now misses his old friends and stays in touch with them. But I think she's having a hard time helping him to then try to create new relationships and bonds. And how can she help without interfering or embarrassing him?
That's a hard one. I actually work with some kids who are in that boat. And one thing I can say is that it does get better. Whether or not you do anything, time and familiarity will help him make friends. But you can encourage him to get involved in activities. If he doesn't want to, there's not a whole lot you can do, but you can plant the seed. You can see if there are any get-togethers that parents are arranging that are full families, so that they're having some out of school interactions. If they're on a team that is with kids at school, you can offer to take them out afterwards to go for ice cream or go for lunch, kind of fan the flames on it a little bit. And I would, in the meantime, really preserve the relationships he has with the old friends, because that will preserve his confidence and give him an opportunity to keep practicing social skills, and might actually bolster his confidence to make overtures to the new friends.
And she said, thank you very much. She will plant the seeds. We also had another great question, which is that regarding teaching concrete social skills, my son wants to be better friends with girls, but often finds them easier to be with than the competitive boys, but is afraid the boys will tease him at this age. How do you teach joining different sex social circles?
Gosh, how do you help kids deal with the fact that they might be teased if they're hanging out with people did you say different
Yes.
sex? Okay.
Different
So
sexes, so he wants to be friends with the girls.
yeah, so that's really typical issue that kids face, and they often do get teased, or they'll get teased if they have a crush, or people will try to, pair them off or ship them together, as the middle schoolers would say.
Good
And
point.
yes, BF and GF. And what you can do is talk to them about things they could say if that happens, sort of going to that worst case scenario. What resources would you need? What would you need to do if that happens? Um, what do you think their motivation is for doing that, kind of taking the power away from those other kids? One of the most powerful things that you can do is say, yeah, I'm friends with them. Okay. And just in that same tone as 2 + 2 = 4. If they're not getting a rise out of you, it's not fun, and it dies down fairly quickly. I will say I did once have a couple of 6th graders who were upset about this, and it was a boy-girl friendship, but not a romantic friendship. And they ended up teaching a lesson in a health and wellness class to their whole class. I helped them put it together on the pros and cons of teasing people about opposite sex friendships. And they came up with a list of do's and don'ts about how, kind of etiquette rules for talking to kids. And they kind of shamed their classmates a little bit, but there's so much agreement. The vast majority of the kids agreed with them that it was ridiculous. It's always, the 1 or 2 kids who are vocal, who are kind of causing trouble, but helping them just understand that most people are not, judging them for that. And usually it comes from a place of jealousy. The friends that they're not hanging out with, the same sex friends that they're not hanging out with, often don't like that they have to share their friend with somebody else of the opposite sex. And so that's coming into play as well.
Well, I love the myriad of ideas that you provided to help parents to not just ask closed-ended questions and not to provide just solutions for your students, or I call them students, but for your kids. That a lot of what I hear you saying is that we want, obviously, to help be the guide and the coach for our kids. And um, another thing, you and I were talking briefly before about Dr. Jonathan Dalton, and one of the things that we have kind of, with his permission, really taken on as a mantra at the Study Pro is the idea of watering the seeds and not the weeds. And of course, we know that to be, um, we want to spend our time and energy talking to our kids about things that we want to see grow, and not, why didn't you do so well on that test, right? And I love how everything that you've done here really supports both that idea of us as shaping and coaching and um, providing direction for our kids, but really letting them come to their own conclusions, as well as the idea of watering those seeds that we want to see grow. And you have 12 categories of seeds that we want to be planted. I just didn't know if you wanted to kind of close by commenting on that at all, but I find that so incredibly encouraging and just fills my heart and just gives me so many great ideas of how to continue that journey myself as a parent.
Yeah, well, you did a great job summing it up, but I just agree. I think that the more we can do to give kids the problem solving skills they're going to need to navigate these situations, most of which they're going to have to navigate without us. Even in middle school, there's a lot that they're dealing with that they're not telling parents about, my own kids included. This is just how they're wired. We want them to hear our voice in their head, and we want them to have the tools they need to be able to feel in control, to feel like they are well equipped to handle whatever life throws at them, and that we're there to coach them when they need it, that we're not abandoning them, but we're also not trying to, manage their lives for them.
Yeah, and that they can come to us even with their strongest emotions because we can handle it, right? And that we're not going to freak out. And I think that's really everything you've shared is just so incredibly important and really inspirational for all of us. I mean, we can see that from the comments that you have a whole bunch of new fans. So thank you so much. I can't tell you how grateful we are. And it was probably the most power packed webinar I think we've almost ever had. So it's really, I have to go back and watch it again. And as I mentioned to everyone, we are going to record it, and there was a lot of questions. Absolutely amazing. Thank you. Thank you from everybody is kind of the comments. So Phyllis, we really appreciate it. You just, we thank you and all of your middle schoolers that gave you this incredible material. So
Thank
we're
you.
super grateful for you being here, and thanks for everybody who came today. And if you want to share the recording, please go out and buy the book. I will say that it is absolutely fantastic. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and have a great day, everybody. We're so glad you're here. Take care.